And again, female corporate or technical folks, which are mostly men, just from a demographic standpoint, and they're probably like, oh my gosh, this lady's reaching out to me and sounds great and sounds inviting, and I'm going to respond back, right? And it just there was something about it.
Are you saying all guys are dogs? They're going to respond to a female before a male?
Hey, but what I see with Gen Z that's a little bit different from the millennials is they grew up in the recession, right?
Sure.
They saw a parent lose a job. They saw a friend maybe lose their house. They saw like the biggest recession that ever hit the U.S. since the Great Depression, right? 300 major leagues, you're a Hall of Famer. If you're a recruiter, 300 batting average, you're fired.
Yeah. They're going to respond to a female before a male?
Hey, I also don't allow my female recruiters to use their personal phones to text candidates.
I get it. I'm kidding.
I don't need any 3 a.m. drunk text,
And it happens, unfortunately.
Sure.
I've heard all the years we've been doing this. I've heard a ton of stories on this. So from a training perspective, you bring in new recruiters today. So think about it from all the people that are watching, right? I mean, how do you get them to do the things you need them to do? Because I've seen so many, and I'm sure you've seen this. They go into corporate, they don't really understand recruiting because all they've been taught, not that they don't have the capability, but all they've been taught is send this email, send this email. How do you actually retrain them to do recruiting the way recruiting needs to be done?
We're just a data-driven organization, right? So we take a look at the funnel, and we take a look at every piece that a recruiter has to do that ultimately ends to a placement, right? So how do I have to fill the top of the funnel on the sourcing side? And from there, then how many of those people do we actually have to reach out to actually get them to respond? Out of the responses, how many of those do we have to screen to find enough good ones to be able to send to a hiring manager to go to the interviews, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And so we know the baseline of what a good recruiter looks like for activity.
Yep.
And so at the very least, right, I need to see that baseline of activity. And then from there, at each segment, we can start to dig into, so what's going on then? Why you're sending over a ton, but they're not asking for the interview. So what's wrong with that relationship with you and that hiring manager that they're not, because like for me,
the conversion rate's not there.
Well, and it's a batting average thing that should be 90%, not like a 300, right? 300 major leagues, you're a Hall of Famer. If you're a recruiter, 300 batting average, you're fired.
Yeah.
So it should be at least if I send 3, let's say I send 5. If I send 5 people to a hiring manager, they better request interviews for 4 or something's wrong. Something's wrong with my screening skills, but also something's wrong with my relationship with that manager.
Yeah.
That manager should trust me enough that goes, oh my gosh. And I would say for me, right, personally, it was 100%. If I send you somebody, that means I want you to interview this person. And if I don't have that relationship with the hiring manager, something's broke.
How do you start building that relationship? Because this is a topic that I talk about all the time. So like you, I get invited in to speak both corporate side and to some of these conferences. Yeah. And one of the big topics that always comes up is this relationship between the recruiter and the hiring leaders. I go to I'll give you an example. Last year I went to the hiring leaders of Fortune 100 financial services company. And I said, what's your relationship like with the recruiters? And they said, well, they suck. They're horrible. I went back over to the recruiting side and I said, what's your relationship like with the same hiring manager? Oh, it's awesome. They love us. It's like, okay, come on now.
Yeah.
So why the disconnect, and how do you actually start to create that relationship before you can show a bunch of proof?
Yeah, for me, it's some of it's just flat out time, right? You have to put the time in so that hiring manager knows that, one, you know their business. You know what their intricacies are in terms of what they're looking for, and that they know that you care enough that you're going to put in that, right? And so it's difficult because if you have a rec load that...
What if I have 50 recs?
Then you're in a position that is unwinnable. Yeah. But at some point, you just have to say, hey, what's the priorities of these 50 recs? Some of these I'm just going to post and pray, but I'm going to actually start to build out some real relationships with some hiring managers, and little by little, maybe we can start to, get down the rec load some other way, or get my hiring managers to help. The reality is unless you have your hiring managers owning the recs themselves, and actually helping you're never really going to get from under 50 anyway. So you better have those relationships there, spend that time, get to know. The other thing I love to do from like a recruiter standpoint is to say, hey, hiring manager, let's do some sourcing as a team together. So I'm going to come in, we're going to schedule a half hour. It's going to be you, it's going to be your team. We're all going to be in a conference room. They're going to bring their laptops, and we're going to sit there and stare at each other until someone gives me a name. And the hiring manager feels really like, oh my gosh, like what am I going to do? And then they get in that and they have their team around them. They're the leader. So they will actually start it. They'll go, okay, hey, let me get in my LinkedIn. Let me get in my Facebook. Yeah. Like, hey, did you, and you'll leave as a recruiter with 25 people. But what it's that hiring manager starts to take ownership of it because their team is looking at them. And as a recruiter, you're looking at them as, this is your team, right? This is your ownership. And then at that point now as a recruiter, I can really support that person. It becomes huge. But also the relationship starts to get built where they go, okay, now, oh my God, hey, you're one on my team as well. Like you're my right-hand person here to help me to do this. And you start to build that out. And to me, but you have to put that time in. They have to know that you care about them.
So do you think that's the primary issue is that recruiters, especially on the corporate side, since you come from the corporate side prior to the agency, they just don't have the time to do it, or they're just not willing to make the time to do it, or they don't know they need to make the time to do it?
So it's multi-pronged, right? I think they feel like they don't have the time because they spend way too much time in meetings.
Yeah.
And they just need to cut that out. And they'll go, well, wait, the meetings I'm in are
meet to meet, but no decisions are ever made.
Yeah. I think they have the time if they would just do it. They also believe that the hiring manager doesn't want to spend their time. Mm-hmm. So they go into these really quick intake meetings that like last 5 minutes, and they're like, and then they jet out instead of like going, no, let's really dig into this.
Yeah,
right?
it's the job description says this. Is this what you want to? Yes. Okay. What's the point of repurposing the exact job description?
And the hiring manager think that's a waste of time.
It sure is.
Like, why are you? We could do this over the phone. Or I could email you this. It's more than that. It's also really digging into their team to find out where's the real fault, where's the shortcomings in your team right now, who's potentially going to be leaving you. Let's really dig into this from a almost like a consultant standpoint, right? To analyze them and their leadership style and where they're at from succession, because then they go, okay, now I understand. Like, okay, so you're looking for this role, but the reality is you really need this. You need 50% of that has to be this, because you don't have anybody if this person leaves that is going to take that, right? And it's connecting dots.
You and I both know most recruiters don't go that far at all. They don't know how to have that conversation, and for that matter, I don't think they're confident enough in most instances, not in all, but to have that conversation. That's probably what separates the 20% from the 8%.
Yeah, and I'm not going in there first probably conversation to have that. Like again, like I always tell people, like just invite somebody to lunch. That's the great thing of, especially on corporate TA or corporate HR. If you invite a hiring manager to lunch, they have no idea why.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's for a raise, maybe I'm getting fired, maybe someone turned me in for harassment.
Sure.
Like they just had no idea why. So there's like, okay. And then it's just like build the relationship. Like where did you go to school and what's your family? What's this? Like don't talk shop. Eventually you'll get there. But like you have to have real relationships.
Drop the HR and recruiter speak too. Mm-hmm. Right. That's what we have. We want to talk about open recs. We want to talk about ATS. We want to talk about LinkedIn, and that's it. Instead of actually developing that real relationship in the first place.
For sure.
So go back to what you originally started talking about. So you've got kids that are Gen Zers.
Yeah.
So now we're in a position where we're going to be recruiting Gen Zers.
Yeah.
Everybody flipped out when it was millennials. We got to have beanbag chairs and a key to a BMW to recruit every millennial at the time, right?
Yeah.
Do you see it changing with the Gen Zers? I mean, you've got your 8 writers.
Yeah.
Are their drives any different than the millennials, and how's that going to impact recruiting moving forward?
Well, I mean, you have just time and age, time and life kinds of things that happen, right? When you're just coming out of college, you're going to be in debt, and you're going to have all those kinds of issues that everybody faces, right? Yeah. You faced it, I faced it, they're going to face it, the millennials faced it. That's just being a young person, right? You're trying to find, are you going to get married, or are you just going to buy a house, or are you going to do it? Like you're always kind of go through all of that. That's just time in life, and so there's some naivety that just happens, right? Yeah. But what I see with Gen Z that's a little bit different from the millennials is they grew up in the recession, right? Sure. They saw a parent lose a job. They saw a friend maybe lose their house. They saw like the biggest recession that ever hit the U.S. since the Great Depression, right? And so what I see from them is like the security of a job becomes really important. Versus millennials were like, oh, they'll just jump from every job and they don't care because corporations don't care about you anymore.
Yeah, a year here, 6 months here, a year there, and that was commonplace.
And Gen Z, I think, has a real pull to go back almost. And like they actually probably equate more with the greatest generation than any other generation. If you think the greatest
generation is repeating itself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah? Right? Now, again, it'll be a little bit different, right? Because of they're also digital natives and the whole thing that happens there. But they're also very much into the security side of I want to go back to, are there companies out there that, and there's companies I think that go and say, hey, in our history or in the last 20 years, we've never laid off one person. That will be a selling point to the Gen Z population that the millennials will be like, so who cares, right?
So millennials have been talking about the freelancing generation, right? Everybody's kind of doing their own thing, the gig economy. So do you think Gen Z, because of what they've experienced, are going to start to offset that a little bit more so than before?
No, I mean, I think Gen Z still grew up in a gig economy. So I think what they'll say is like, hey, what's your first gig, right? What's that one that's going to pay the bills? What's that foundation? And then, oh, by the way, I can still have these side gigs of doing things as well. That just becomes part of life at this point. I think everyone kind of understands that. So, but I mean, again, it's just one trait I think that we see from Gen Z. I also think that when we take a look at Gen Z, unlike millennial, and again, it's broad stroke, right?
Yeah, and that's all we're looking for, right? We're doing what we shouldn't be doing, but we're doing it.
Yeah, when you take a look at a lot of the millennials, again, they came in saying, "Oh, I want to be the boss, right? In 90 days, and I want to have a seat at the table and have this voice, right away, even though look, you don't even know where the bathroom is yet. Like, calm down." And we see less of that with Gen Z, where they're kind of like, "Hey, let me just get into the job and work hard and keep my head down." And so again, going back to that greatest generation, there's a little bit of that where they were kind of taught like, hey, don't be the one that has the light shined on them, right? Because of this recession, you don't want to be the one that's easy to be let go if someone let goes. And then on top of that, think of the transition. So they lived through lived through that Great Recession, went through college in a really good time, right? I mean, in excellent economic times. And all of a sudden now they start to hear the whispers that something's coming. A softening's coming. Yeah. And that even is almost like it's almost like they put them through like PTSD, where if they're like, oh crap, like here it comes again.
I don't want to go through that again.
And when I was a kid, I saw this, and my parents talked about this, and so it is something I think that will be impactful to watch and see how that generation, potentially their work ethic or their tenure with the organizations actually, I think, expands a little bit.
So from a recruiting perspective, do we have to change the way in which we recruit a millennial versus a Gen Z in light of that? Because it's coming.
Could be, right. I mean, it could be a little bit less on, and for millennials, we really went all in on opportunity and the growth and all of this stuff that was going to happen really fast. And we're going to give you all this stuff so that you can move and you can be the CEO of your life in 13 days, right?
And you'll have a beanbag chair in your office.
And I think we get back to a little bit of circling the wagons a little bit and talking about security and talking about the health of our companies. And like, think about that. In a decade or more, we haven't really talked about the health of an organization. When I first started recruiting, so we go back that 25 years, I would have people actually ask me to say, well, what about their financials?
All the time.
That was a common conversation because they wanted to know, like, hey, what's going on with this company? Especially when you talk about like startups and all of this. Like, millennials will go work for a startup in a heartbeat because they're like, oh my gosh, I get some equity and I get this. I think we see Gen Z going, well, wait a minute. Like, that's like, are they actually making money? And no one's talked about that for like a decade.
Well, think about companies like Tesla. They're still losing money, but everybody wants to go work there, even though they're laying people off.
Well, we see they're struggling right now.
They are.
SpaceX, Tesla, and all these are struggling to get younger talent to come work for them. And part of that is because they're like, well, wait a minute, I can go work for an organization that has made $1 billion a quarter for the last 10 years. I don't know.
Go back to the old school GE or something like that, right? When Jack Welch was running it. Think about it. You wrote an interesting article about the Me Too thing. Tell me about that article.
I'm at a conference, right? Going out to dinner with a client, and I'm a hugger. She was a hugger. So we have a couple bottles of wine. We have dinner. Go to give her a hug, and like, bam, like kisses me right in the mouth. And again, I'm like happily married, and have been for a long time and want to stay for a long time. But I write every day. So I was like, how do I write about this? But I don't want to burn this relationship because it was an important relationship for me. And so I just came up with these rules of hugging. Like, there should be rules about this, right? And so it was professional workplace hugging rules. Threw it up on the blog. Didn't even think about it. Next day, I'm at the conference and like I'm speaking and get off, and like my phone is literally, I have like 127 text messages. So what happened was like the CEO of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, like actually found it. Someone had passed it on, and like he shared it, and it went viral.